Hey guys, this is Amiltons, and this is What If Naruto Was a Scientist, Part 2. So, there's nothing else for me to talk about, so without further ado, roll the intro. Finally, Naruto thought as he watched the ostrich-sized snake egg from Reach Cave start rocking. It had taken over a full year for the egg to incubate. During that time, Naruto had studied and performed more experiments than ever before. He had kept all his experiments to mainly snakes and a few fish. The snakes' experiments were mostly neither good nor bad, though he had managed to clone Spectre, which yielded some pretty interesting results. The clone looked almost identical to the real Spectre, except for the fact that the pattern was solid black with spots of white, imitating a black and white camo look, instead of the all-white with black bands along its length that the original Spectre had. But the really interesting thing was that the clone seemed to be an extension of the original Spectre. Upon further inspection of the clone, or Spectre Copy 001, as Naruto had aptly named it, was connected to the original like a network via their minds. The original Spectre, or Spectre Copy Original, as Naruto had renamed him, seemed to be the mastermind, or the main one. The other Spectres were simply just extensions of it. Naruto had quickly stopped sending Spectre Copy Original to gather information, and instead commissioned Spectre Copy 001 to take up the original's former job. He had also changed the pattern on the back of the Copy 001, right below the head, to read 001 in small print. This helped Naruto identify between any further clones he might make. Then came teaching Copy Original to speak, which was more difficult than it sounded. Sure, the snake was smart, but it couldn't naturally pick up human speech. It required a little genetic tweaking, which luckily went smoothly. Copy Original was well on the way to being able to verbally share the secrets that's currently only Copy had collected. Then there were the odd jobs that Hiruzen had occasionally given to Naruto. So far, Hiruzen had only given Naruto one. A couple ninjas had returned from a B-rank mission with a vial of poison from a factory in the Land of Bears. The poison had been used to completely wipe out the rebellion that was opposing the daimyo in the Land of Rice Paddies. Naruto quickly snapped out of his thoughts. He stared back down at the egg as hairline fractures began to form in the shell. A few seconds later, a large piece of the shell popped off and a snake slithered out. The snake was a purplish blue color with jet black undersides. Its feature structure was similar to a cobra, and it had two sets of claws along its length, two near the front and two near the back. Side note, if you guys need like a better visual, just think like Manga 2, but without like the rattlesnake tail. Anyway, back to the story. Okay, Naruto thought. Trial run. The Riichi Snake Cave snakes were different. Even a newborn could kill you. So if the snake didn't immediately listen to him, it never would. Come, Naruto said softly but firmly, dearly hoping that the chakra he had planted in his brain before the snake had actually hatched, and while it was developing, took hold and worked as it should. The snake's head immediately snapped up to meet Naruto's eyes, and it held his gaze for a few seconds before looking down and slithering over to Naruto's arm. I think I'll name you Cleopatra, Naruto said, before smiling and starting to cackle insanely. He stopped after hearing an uncomfortable cough coming from behind him. Quickly clearing his throat, Naruto spun around, the newly hatched snake still on his arm, giving a hiss of displeasure at the sudden movement. Hey old man, Naruto said to Hiruzen, who had coughed. How's it going? Guess what? I just had another success. You see, Naruto, Hiruzen said, humor coloring his words. You're rambling again. It was times like these that Hiruzen was reminded that despite how smart Naruto was, or the seriousness he portrayed when working, he was still just a child. Granted, a really smart child, and he's social and slightly very eccentric and quite talented, but a child nonetheless. Looking around, Hiruzen spotted a sleeping bag in the corner. Have you been sleeping in your lab again, Naruto? No, Naruto said immediately and quickly, averting his eyes. Hiruzen stared at Naruto, and a few seconds later Naruto responded, maybe, before fully wilting under Hiruzen's gaze and responding, yes. Hiruzen sighed heavily. We've talked about this, Naruto. You can't just live down here. But the reason I came. Turning slightly, Hiruzen spoke to someone who was behind him, a child evident by the fact that Hiruzen's flowing robes were able to hide them. Say hello, Karin, Hiruzen said, as a girl around Naruto's age slightly leaned out from behind Hiruzen. She had shoulder-length, silky scarlet red hair, a couple shades lighter than Naruto's own wine red. She had almond-shaped eyes with crimson red irises and an angular face. Hi, she said, obviously shy. Naruto blinked for a couple times before quickly walking up to Hiruzen and dragging him to the other end of the lab. You know I don't like talking to other people, old man, Naruto said, whispering angrily. Naruto, I know, but I haven't asked much of you, Hiruzen said. But it also might interest you to know that her last name is also Uzumaki. Naruto opened his mouth to reply with, and I know, before what Hiruzen said fully processed. What is it exactly you want me to do? Naruto asked wearily. Well, she will be living in this apartment complex, Hiruzen began. Though as much as I would like for her to be able to join the Ninja Academy and become a kunoichi, she isn't a lead citizen, so she can't. Though in theory, if she were to work in a private company, like her private research lab, she could gain her lead citizenship after maybe 4 years. Of course, that would make her too old to apply for the academy, but she would be the right age to take the graduation exam. If, in theory, someone from the lab she worked at were to be able to teach her the basics of the shinobi skills that would allow her to pass the graduation exam, she could still become a genin. Really? Naruto asked, almost incredulous. I have to daily interact with other people? Naruto, I think you're overreacting, Hiruzen said. You mastered the chakra scalpel along with starting to learn basic medical ninjutsu. If you can do that, you can do this. And besides, the academy is starting in about 2 weeks where you'll be forced to interact with dozens of other students. She's really, really smart. Kind of like you. And, you know, every good scientist needs a good assistant, you know? Just think about it, okay? Fine, Naruto said, briskly walking over to where Karin was observing the only stasis tank that was currently in use. There was a sort of barracuda-like fish inside. Karin, Naruto said, causing her to whip around. You can stay here, and you'll be working as my assistant. But that also means I'll be teaching you the basic shinobi skills, so that you can pass the graduation exam in 4 years. But this means I'll be training you as hard as possible. My work is really delicate and your strength reflects on me, even if no one's really going to see. But that's beside the point. Okay, got that? Karin nodded enthusiastically. You won't regret it, I promise. Yeah, whatever, Naruto said before turning away. But anyways, come on, I guess it's time for your first hands-on lesson. We're gonna be making a clone of an animal. After that, get started on reading all the books in that bookshelf over there, Naruto said, pointing to the bookshelf against the wall near the desk. Karin nodded again. Time skip. 3 weeks. Naruto sighed as he watched Karin determinedly taking notes on the current science book she was on, genetic engineering. She was just too damn determined, and it made it hard for him not to like her. She put in tons of work to make sure the lab was well organized while Naruto was at the academy. When Naruto returned to the apartment complex after class ended, around 3 o'clock, they would usually begin working on Funjutsu, where she would again throw as much effort as she could into doing it. And Naruto had to tip his proverbial hat to Karin in that area. She was a literal genius when it came to memorizing and mastering the basic Funjutsu skills that are already made. That wasn't to say Naruto was bad, or even normal at Funjutsu. Quite the contrary, in fact. He had a slight edge over Karin when it came to inventing new Funjutsu seals and using them in the middle of battle. In fact, Naruto had started selling his newly created seals to a shinobi weapon shop by the name of the Bull's Horns for about 55% of the sales made. And as it would happen, Naruto's seals were quite popular. For example, one of Naruto's seals, the Hyperweight seal, allowed a person to store a lot more inside of one scroll. The 60% of the money he gained from selling these seals went into funding his research, and the other 40% just went into living. Though the really interesting upside was that Naruto, with the help of Karin, had managed to find a solution to where to house his summons. Karin had used her incredible skill in that area to slightly modify the reverse summoning technique to be able to reverse summon them to a specific location in the summon world. It had taken a few tries before they had finally found a suitable location, but they had found a location nonetheless. An abandoned floating giant island that used to host a colony of mice summons. It was perfect. There are giant trees to host possible avian creatures if Naruto ever decided to experiment on birds. Huge, crystal clear blue lakes if Naruto ever decided to make fish summons a thing. And giant tunnels under the island for Cleopatra to reside in, or other snakes should he decide to make more. And lots of underbrush for the Spectre colony to live in. Though currently, Cleopatra was still in the lab, as were all the other creatures Naruto had created. The island needed to be stocked with food and checked for toxins. Cleopatra was also still too small. Under 10 feet, though growing that large in 3 weeks was still quite a feat. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, Naruto spoke up. Karin, I'm heading to school now. After I get back, we have a stop to make. There's someone I want you to meet. They'll help you with your weapons training. I've already told them about you, so be prepared. Karin looked up and nodded before turning back to her work. Time skip. 2 hours. Naruto was sitting in the back of the classroom, keeping to himself, as usual. For about a week now, he'd been trying to unlock his clan's bloodline. They had adamantium chains. Strong, versatile, and deployable without any outwards movement. They'd be a very useful ace in his skill repertoire. Just when Naruto saw his palm starting to glint with a goldenish gleam, Sakura called out his name in her normal shrill voice. Naruto Baka! Sakura's grating voice called. Stop ignoring Iruka, sensei, and pay attention. Naruto looked up with a bored expression. And who says I wasn't paying attention? I think you check my class standings, you'll find my rank says otherwise. In fact, Iruka-sensei, please pick any question that might be covered in any one of the years in the academy and ask it to me. Iruka thought for a moment before speaking. Please explain the rank and the purpose of the Tokubetsu Jonin. Naruto smirked before responding. The purpose of the rank of Tokubetsu Jonin is to filter out the chunin that are Jonin level in a specific area, such as information gathering, but chunin level in the rest of their areas. It also allows for relief of strain on the other members of Jonin rank in times of war, as the Tokubetsu Jonin are a step above chunin, but a step below Jonin in the chain of command. Naruto then turned to Sakura, who's gaping at him. Elementary. Iruka coughed uncomfortably before getting back to the lesson. Time skip. End of the school day. Naruto and Karin were entering a shop called the Bull's Horns. This was the same shop that sold Naruto's seals. Hey Naruto, a gruff voice called. Naruto looked up to see a familiar face. Hey Mirako. Mirako was the owner of the Bull's Horns and the father of the person Naruto wanted Karin to meet. Is it ready? Naruto asked hopefully. Mirako nodded and placed a black case on the counter before opening it. Naruto stared at the katana inside. The sheath was all black, but the handle of the blade had a royal purple and jet black diamond pattern. When Naruto pulled the blade out of the sheath, he noticed the blade was also jet black, with a purple wave pattern on the sharp edge. It's called the Hibi no Kage, or Snake Shadow, Mirako said. A fitting name, Naruto replied, taking a few practice swings. Do you have any boken? I'll need them for sword training. Oh, and is she here? Side note, boken are just like wooden katana that are used for training. But anyway, back to the story. Mirako nodded as he placed the two wooden boken on the counter. Naruto heard footsteps and turned to the left. Oh, hey Tenten. Hi Naruto, Tenten replied before looking at Karin. Is this the person you need help with weapon training? Naruto nodded as Tenten began to speak again. Well, what are we waiting for? Come on! Weapon training is going to choose itself, and I'm really glad I have another person to train weapons. There aren't many of those nowadays. But anyway, let's go. Come on, come on. She never changes, Naruto thought to himself before following. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time.